Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. It started with tire tracks, fresh, bold, and cutting straight through my land like a slap in the face. By sundown, I'd locked a gate. By sunrise, I was at war with the Queen of Suburbia and her army of HOA lawyers. They wanted a shortcut. I gave them a showdown. It was a dry, stubborn kind of Texas morning, the kind where the dust clings to your boots before you've even stepped off the porch. I had just gotten back from 3 days upstate, helping a neighboring county with a livestock theft ring, and all I wanted was to sit on my porch swing, drink my coffee, and listen to the breeze rustle through the mesquites. But instead, I got a rude surprise before I even made it to the coffee pot. My ranch, passed down through 4 generations of Stanhopes before me, stretches a good 120 acres, most of it fenced and self-contained. At least, it was supposed to be. As I pulled into the gravel drive near the eastern pasture, something felt off. There were tire marks, fresh ones on the far side of the fence, tracks from ATVs, golf carts, even what looked like a luxury SUV, and where my boundary line curved toward the dry creek, I saw it. A crude, bulldozed path running right through the cedar brush and cutting across my lower pasture like a damn scar. I didn't say a word. I just parked the truck, got out, and stared at it. The so-called trail was maybe 12 feet wide, packed down like it had seen daily use for weeks. Bent wire fence lay tossed into the brush like garbage, and my no trespassing sign had been knocked down and run over so many times I could barely read the bullet holes anymore. I followed the ruts with my eyes, straight through to the border with Redstone Hills, the HOA development that had popped up like a blister last year. I should have seen this coming. They'd been inching closer with their smug little mini-mansions and imported grass lawns, acting like the world owed them asphalt and clubhouses, but cutting a road through my land. That was a new level of audacity. I walked the length of the damage, phone in hand, snapping photos, keeping my boots out of the fresh dog crap someone's precious golden doodle had left behind. There were even a few plastic poop bags tied to my fence posts like decorations. Real classy. That evening, I didn't call anyone. I didn't post on social media or complain to the county. I just called up Casey, my ranch hand and part-time deputy, and told him to meet me at the gate at sunrise. Then I spent the next few hours reviewing the land deed my grandfather signed in 1932, just to remind myself that I wasn't losing my damn mind. At dawn, Casey and I rolled out in the truck with fencing tools, posts, and one hell of a heavy-duty metal gate I'd been meaning to install for years. We worked for hours, stringing new barbed wire, planting cedar posts with concrete, and bolting the gate shut at both ends. I even rigged an electronic keypad with remote lockout. Nobody was getting through that shortcut again, not unless they wanted a ride in the back of a patrol cruiser. As we were finishing up, a black SUV skidded to a halt on the other side. Out stepped a woman in tennis whites, big sunglasses, and the kind of attitude you can smell before she even opens her mouth. I recognized her instantly. Karen Summers, self-declared president of Redstone Hills and unofficial queen of neighborhood fascism. She stomped toward the fence like she owned the dirt under her feet. What is this? You can't just block a road that people use every day. I looked at her without flinching. This isn't a road, ma'am. It's my pasture. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped. We've always used this path. Everyone in Redstone knows it's a public access route to the tennis courts. Casey snorted. I didn't. Redstone Hills was built 2 years ago, I said. This land's been in my family for over 100. You've been trespassing. That ends today. Karen's jaw worked like a stalled engine. You'll regret this. You'll be hearing from our lawyers. I look forward to it. She stormed off in a cloud of gravel and indignation, shouting into her phone before her SUV even finished turning around. As I watched her taillights disappear, I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out a toothpick. I'd seen a lot of entitlement in my life, but that woman was operating on a different frequency altogether. And I had a bad feeling she hadn't even started yet. The next day, I was deep into clearing brush along the northern fence line when my radio crackled. Sheriff, dispatch just got a call. Someone down near Redstone Hills is demanding immediate police intervention, says a hostile landowner is blocking access to public roads. I didn't need to ask who. I told dispatch I'd handle it personally and threw my gear in the back of the truck. 15 minutes later, I pulled up to the same gate we'd installed the day before. There were 2 HOA security guards standing there, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else, and Karen was pacing in full theatrical rage, her hands slicing through the air like knives. She didn't recognize me at first, not without my Stetson and badge on display. I let her keep ranting while I stepped out of the truck and slowly buttoned my uniform shirt. This lunatic has put up an illegal barrier across our access road. I demand that you arrest him immediately. I don't care if he's got barbed wire and land claims from the Stone Age. This is obstruction. This is criminal. I let her finish. Then I calmly pulled out my badge and held it up at eye level. "Ma'am," I said, "you just called 911 to report a felony trespassing barricade. That barricade's on my land, and I'm the sheriff of this county." The silence hit like a thunderclap. Karen blinked, lips twitching, the color draining from her face. One of the security guards took an unconscious step backward. "What?" she stammered. You can't be serious." I clicked my body cam on and gestured toward the gate. "Let's make this official, Ms. Summers. I'd like you to explain to me, on record, exactly how long you've been encouraging your community to use a route that runs across private property you don't own." She froze, eyes darting between the gate, my badge, and the growing audience behind her. A few residents had wandered over from Redstone Hills, no doubt drawn by the drama. One man in gym shorts looked like he was filming on his phone until he saw me glance his way. Karen tried to pivot. "This is clearly a misunderstanding. We just assumed the path was public. After all, it's been used regularly. Surely you understand community needs, Sheriff. You can't expect us to go all the way around. That's almost a 10-minute detour." "That's not my problem," I said. "What is my problem is the destruction of fencing, trespassing on posted land, and now a false report to emergency services." Her mouth fell open again. I pulled a folded copy of the land deed from my pocket and handed it over. "You can have your HOA attorney take a look. My family's owned this ranch since 1932. There's no easement, no right-of-way, no gray area. Just one long, uninterrupted line of private ownership." Karen's hands trembled as she read the paper. "I'll be filing an official complaint," she hissed. "You think you're above the law just because you wear a badge." I smiled without humor. "No, ma'am, I am the law. And right now, I'm telling you, if you or anyone from your community sets foot past this gate again without my permission, it's criminal trespass." She stormed off without another word, shoving the deed into her purse like it might contaminate her. Later that evening, I filed an incident report just to have it on the record, noting that the gate installation was a response to unlawful encroachment, not provocation. Casey installed 2 more cameras, both with infrared and auto upload to cloud storage. I wasn't about to give anyone a second chance at plausible deniability. Still, something about the way Karen looked at me when she left stuck with me. Not fear, not even anger, defiance. The kind of defiance that doesn't stop at words. I knew she wasn't done, and neither was I. For about a week, things got quiet. Too quiet. There were no more tire tracks, no angry neighbors showing up at the gate. Karen seemed to have vanished back behind the iron gates of Redstone Hills, and if I hadn't known better, I'd have thought the woman finally accepted defeat. But that's the thing about people like her. They don't surrender. They regroup. Sure enough, it started with whispers. A local paper, Hill County Chronicle, which usually runs stories about bake sales and prize pumpkins, ran a strange little editorial. The headline read, "Community Denied Access to Historic Route by Rogue Landowner." I laughed when I first saw it, until I realized they were talking about me. They didn't name me directly, but it was clear enough. Longtime rancher in the Eastern District, holding up traffic flow and community harmony by installing aggressive fortifications. Aggressive fortifications? It was a gate. A nice one, even. The real kicker came 2 days later when a certified letter arrived at the sheriff's office addressed to me personally. Karen was filing an official complaint with the county land board, claiming a historic public right-of-way existed across my property and demanding that the barrier be removed immediately under threat of civil action. Attached were copies of old black and white maps that looked like they'd been Xeroxed into oblivion. A red dotted line meandered across what she claimed was the old community trail, supposedly used since the early 1900s. It ran straight through my lower pasture and ended at what is now their private tennis club. I snorted. There hadn't been a community trail through this land in living memory. My grandfather used to run cattle down there, and my dad once shot a rattler the size of a garden hose near that exact spot. If anybody ever walked it regularly, it was cows. Still, I knew better than to laugh it off. Karen wasn't working alone anymore. Someone with technical knowledge had drawn up these diagrams. She had money, and she was using it. So I did what any decent sheriff with something to protect would do. I went digging. I called up Marcy at the county records office. She'd worked there for 30 years, knew every deed in the region by heart, and didn't suffer fools. Karen Summers, Redstone Hills, she said when I gave her the name. Oh, Lord. She came in here last week waving a bunch of papers, demanding expedited copies of zoning overlays from the 50s. Had that smug HOA lawyer with her. What's his name? Ridley? Sounds about right, I muttered. Marcy pulled the archive files for my family's deed and scanned them over while we talked. Lucas, there's never been any legal easement across your land. Not in 1932, not now. I can send you the documents. I'll come get 'em myself. What she handed me was gold. Not only was there no right-of-way ever established, but she had certified scans of the original topographical surveys, long before Redstone Hills even existed. The so-called trail Karen was citing, it was a dry wash, nothing more. Meanwhile, Casey had been monitoring the gate cameras and noticed something odd. At night, the same vehicle, a silver sedan, had been parking near the gate, lights off, just sitting there for an hour or so before pulling away. License plate came back to an LLC registered in Houston. She's bringing in consultants, I said. Probably trying to manufacture evidence. Sure enough, a few days later, a new article ran, this time not in the Chronicle, but in a slicker online blog that covers property disputes and land rights. It included scanned survey reports from a so-called independent geospatial firm out of Dallas. The article accused me of erecting a barrier on communal land and even suggested I'd used my position as sheriff to intimidate residents. I didn't even have time to laugh. I was already on the phone with the state's land surveyor board, requesting a certification check on the firm Karen had hired. Turns out, they didn't exist. The firm was a front. No registered license, no website, no tax ID, just a name on a PDF. Now it was personal. That night, I sat down in my office with a pot of strong coffee and started writing a formal motion to file with the county. If Karen wanted war, I'd bring the entire history of my land down on her like a hammer. It was a Thursday night when Casey barged into the barn office, holding a tablet like it was a bomb about to go off. "You need to see this," he said, breathless. Camera 4 picked something up. I leaned in and squinted at the screen. There, in grainy infrared, were two men creeping along the back fence line, one dragging a chainsaw, the other holding a flashlight taped over with red cellophane. Casey froze the frame on the guy with the saw. Recognize him? It didn't take more than a glance. That was Darren Summers, Karen's no-good nephew. I'd seen him once at a HOA meeting years ago, fresh off a DUI and already mouthing off to the deputies. The other one was harder to place until Casey zoomed in on the logo on his jacket. Branford Landscaping, it read. One of the firms the HOA used for their overpriced flower beds and Christmas light installations. I stared at the screen for a full 10 seconds, not quite believing it. They were going after the gate. I didn't waste time. I radioed dispatch, told them I was responding to attempted criminal mischief on private property, and asked for backup, but said I'd be on site first. I holstered my sidearm, clipped on the badge, and rolled out in my truck, tires spitting gravel as I flew down the ranch trail. By the time I got to the gate, I could hear the saw revving in the distance, near the eastern post. I killed my lights, crept closer on foot, and came up behind them like a shadow. "Drop the tools and step back from the fence," I barked. The guy with the chainsaw jumped so hard he dropped it right onto his own foot, though thankfully it wasn't running. Darren bolted, tried to vault the low stone wall to the side, and went down like a sack of feed. I was on him in 2 seconds flat. In less than 5 minutes, I had both of them cuffed and face down in the dirt. Flashlight spinning nearby like a spotlight in a horror movie. The air smelled like oil, pine dust, and panic. I read them their rights, cuffed Darren to the tailgate, and started the paperwork right there with my body cam rolling. "Whose idea was this?" I asked calmly. Darren looked smug for a split second. "You'll never prove anything." "Buddy," I said, holding up the body cam, "you just tried to chainsaw through a sheriff's gate on a recorded property after dark with tools tied to a company owned by your aunt's HOA. You want to bet on who gets the jury's sympathy?" The landscaper cracked first. "She told us to do it. Said it was urgent, said the county was about to declare it public land, and we needed to reclaim it before the court date." I froze. Court date? So that was it. Karen wasn't just grandstanding. She was preparing some kind of full legal assault, and this stunt was supposed to support her public access claim. But now I had them both on attempted vandalism, trespassing, conspiracy to damage property, and resisting arrest. And it was all on camera. The next morning, I brought the footage and statements to the DA's office. Hank Morris, our county prosecutor, watched the clips with his jaw tightening. "She gave the order?" he asked. "According to the landscaper, yeah." "I'll need sworn statements, but we can run with that. This isn't just HOA politics anymore. She's looking at criminal charges for conspiracy and attempted property destruction." "You might want to add tampering with county zoning records," I said, and handed over the evidence packet on the forged survey firm. Hank nodded. "I'll get a subpoena rolling by end of day." Meanwhile, word of the arrest spread fast, especially since Darren spent the night in holding and ran his mouth to every inmate in the drunk tank. By lunch, every deputy and rancher within 20 miles had heard the story. Karen's family tried to chainsaw the sheriff's gate. I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because Karen hadn't blinked when I showed her a badge. I doubted a court summons would be enough to stop her either. The courthouse was buzzing that morning like a hornet's nest someone poked with a branding iron. Karen had finally filed her suit. Officially. Through a real estate law firm out of Austin with a taste for spectacle and no shame in dragging a court into a 3-ring circus. The claim? That a community access corridor had existed across my property for decades and that my unilateral blockade was a violation of public easement rights. She included doctored maps, the bogus survey reports, and even submitted an affidavit from one of her HOA board members claiming they'd personally walked that trail since childhood. It was pure fiction, and worse, it was strategic. Karen wasn't stupid. She knew I wouldn't be able to dismiss this quietly now that it was public record. I showed up in uniform. Some might have said that was theatrical, but I didn't care. It was my land, my name, and my fence in that lawsuit. If she wanted to put on a show, she'd better be ready to share the spotlight with the sheriff. My attorney, Marlene Wilcox, was already there when I arrived. Former federal prosecutor, tough as boot leather, and had a look that could cut glass. She greeted me with a curt nod and handed me a copy of Karen's complaint with several lines already highlighted. "She's either got brass balls or no brain cells," she muttered. Claims a historic trail was maintained by the county until 1991. I called the records office this morning. There's no such listing. Ever. The judge presiding was Judge Tillman. Fair man, retired Navy, didn't tolerate nonsense. Karen arrived late, of course, in a cream-colored power suit and sunglasses like she was walking onto a red carpet. Her lawyer looked 10 years younger than me and tried to act like he was already winning the case. When the proceedings began, Karen's team went straight for drama. They produced a poster-sized print of the forged survey, described how the so-called trail was integral to community life, and even passed around aerial photos with a red dotted line drawn over them like a coloring book. Karen dabbed at her eyes like a silent film actress while her attorney read a rehearsed statement about heritage, history, and unity. Marlene didn't flinch. When it was our turn, she calmly handed the judge a packet of original deeds, notarized county surveys, and a sworn affidavit from Marcy at the records office. And then she played the footage. Karen's face went pale when the courtroom TV flickered to life and showed her nephew and the landscaper creeping toward the fence, chainsaw in hand. You could see my badge in the moonlight as I made the arrest. Then came the audio, the landscaper clearly naming her as the one who sent them. The room went silent except for the click of the remote as Marlene paused it. "Your Honor," she said, "not only does this lawsuit rest on fabricated evidence and false claims, but the plaintiff has already engaged in unlawful attempts to forcibly alter the property to support those claims." The judge stared down at Karen. "Do you have any comment on this footage, Mrs. Summers?" Karen straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and said with a sneer, "I was told that land was already under review. I have every right to defend my community's interests by sending men with chainsaws to destroy private fencing." Her lawyer jumped in, muttering about miscommunications and contractor misunderstandings. But it was too late. The damage was done. Judge Tillman ordered a continuance to allow for criminal investigations to proceed before civil hearings would resume. He denied the injunction Karen was seeking to remove the gate, citing unresolved factual discrepancies and concerns of bad faith. In plain English, she lost the first round. Outside the courthouse, a local news truck was already waiting. I kept my mouth shut, didn't give a statement, but as Karen stormed past with her lawyer fumbling behind her, she hissed, "This isn't over." I didn't respond. I just touched the brim of my hat and headed back to my truck. Behind me, I could hear the sound of camera shutters clicking. The next few weeks moved like a slow-burning prairie fire. Nothing dramatic on the surface, but you could feel the heat rising. After Judge Tillman's ruling, the DA's office kicked their investigation into high gear. Hank Morris, the county prosecutor, began issuing subpoenas like candy. He called in zoning officials, HOA board members, surveyors, hell, even the notary who'd signed one of the fake easements. One by one, the cracks in Karen's story started to widen into full-blown fault lines. At the same time, I wasn't just sitting on my porch drinking coffee. I drove down to the county archives in person, digging through dusty ledgers and brittle plats going back nearly a century. My family had held that land since 1913, when my great-grandfather registered the original deed under the Texas Homestead Act. I even found a photo from the 30s showing a cattle fence standing exactly where the modern one now ran, the same route Karen claimed was a public trail. But the real gold came when I dug into zoning meeting minutes from 5 years ago. Buried deep in a stack of agendas was a record of a petition, Karen Summers requesting the county planning board to reclassify an access corridor connecting Redstone Hills to county road frontage. It had been rejected flatly. And who had signed the rejection? Me. Back when I was a deputy attending planning sessions on rotation. She'd tried this route before, quietly, legally, and failed. And now she was trying to forge her way through. I turned everything over to Hank. The man looked like a kid on Christmas morning. "I can work with this," he muttered, flipping through the documents. "You're telling me she submitted fake survey maps after being denied by the county?" "Yup. And she sent men to tear down your gate after the lawsuit was filed?" "Yup. God help her lawyer." By the end of the month, Karen was served with an official notice. The state was filing charges of conspiracy to commit property damage, submitting false records to a public office, and attempted fraud through zoning manipulation. She tried to play it off like it was nothing, gave some smirking quote to the local paper about rogue prosecutors and paranoid sheriffs. But behind closed doors, I heard whispers. Her own HOA board was growing uneasy. One of the members, Pamela Griggs, reached out to Marlene anonymously, saying she'd like to cooperate in exchange for limited immunity. Apparently, the forged survey wasn't just Karen's idea. The HOA had voted secretly to fund the alternate documentation project and used member dues to pay the firm, a shady geotech outfit based 2 counties over that didn't even have a state license anymore. So, now the state had misappropriation of HOA funds, conspiracy, and fraudulent zoning influence on the table. And Karen, she was circling the wagons. I noticed her security detail around Redstone Hills got larger, more cameras, more patrols. She'd even put up new private HOA property signs on the shared county road that ran parallel to my southern fence. Another move that caught the attention of the county board, who didn't take kindly to citizens trying to restrict public right-of-way. It was unraveling faster than she could staple things together. One morning, as I was loading hay into the barn, I got a call from Deputy Ramirez. "Hey boss, you're gonna love this," he said, trying not to laugh. "Karen just filed a temporary restraining order against you. Says she fears retaliatory behavior from an armed law enforcement official with a grudge." I blinked. "She filed it where?" "In small claims court." Jesus. I hung up, dusted off my hands, and headed inside. That woman wasn't just desperate now. She was grasping at any rope she could find, even if it was on fire. The call came in just after 2 in the morning. It was Casey, my ranch hand, and the only man on earth who thought 4 a.m. was mid-morning. His voice was calm, but I could hear the edge in it. "Sheriff, you need to come down to the east gate. Now." I was out of bed, dressed, and in the truck before the second cup of coffee could finish brewing. As I rolled down the dirt track toward the corner entrance of the property, the one nearest Redstone Hills, my headlights picked up the shine of something metallic, and then I saw them. 2 men, one crouched near the gate, bolt cutters in hand, the other holding a flashlight and gesturing nervously. I killed the engine, stepped out, and walked forward, quiet, heavy. "Evening, boys." They froze. The guy with the bolt cutters dropped them like they were hot coals. The flashlight jerked toward me, and I saw the face behind it. Ricky Summers, Karen's nephew. Of course. "Turn around." Hands where I can see 'em. They hesitated, and I drew my sidearm, not out of panic, but with the ease of a man who knows the law and knows when it's time to remind others. By the time Casey pulled up on his ATV, they were cuffed, seated on the back of my truck, and muttering excuses that made less sense than a snake on stilts. They said we were just clearing debris. It's her fence anyway. Karen said it was already ruled illegal. I didn't say much, just read them their rights and called in backup. Deputy Ramirez arrived 20 minutes later, shaking his head before even stepping out. You realize these idiots just committed felony trespass and attempted destruction of property under the supervision of the sheriff himself? Sure do. By dawn, they were processed and sitting in holding, singing like a pair of canaries on meth. Apparently, Karen had told them, in writing, to disassemble the gate while the sheriff's distracted by court proceedings. She even texted the location, the estimated time window, and gave them a prepaid Visa card for equipment costs. The digital trail was a mile long. Ramirez and I drove over to the DA's office that same morning with everything in hand. Hank's eyes lit up like Christmas morning again. "She's toast," he said. "This crosses from zoning games into criminal conspiracy." By noon, the warrant was signed. Karen was arrested at home. She answered the door in a silk robe like she thought this was some bad soap opera, tried to act surprised. Claimed she had no idea her nephew was doing anything illegal. When Hank presented the text, she pivoted to accusing me of surveillance harassment. Didn't matter. We booked her, processed her, and released her on bail. But the headlines were already out. HOA president arrested in sheriff's land dispute. That night, my phone blew up. Calls from reporters, county officials, 3 different HOA presidents from nearby communities who were thrilled to hear the Redstone tyrant had finally met her match. But the most surprising was an email from a woman named Abigail Kinney, a civil litigation attorney specializing in HOA fraud cases. Her message was short. "Mr. Stanley, I believe you may be sitting on the biggest HOA abuse case I've ever seen, and I'd like to help." I stared at the screen a moment, then smiled, because it wasn't just about a fence anymore. The first court date was set for 3 weeks out, but in legal terms, that might as well have been a minute. My days blurred into depositions, attorney meetings, and quiet drives back and forth between the courthouse and the ranch. Still, I made time for the horses. They didn't care about lawsuits or grand juries. They just wanted oats and a rub behind the ears. Abigail Kinney proved to be sharper than a snake fang dipped in Tabasco. She wasn't just here for show. She tore into every document Karen had ever submitted to the county with the grace of a surgeon and the fury of someone who'd seen HOA abuse ruin good families. Within days, she drafted a civil countersuit against Karen and the HOA board, alleging misappropriation of funds, falsification of records, attempted trespass, and abuse of regulatory processes. "Let's hit them with everything," she said, tapping her pen like a war drum. "Not just criminal, civil, financial, professional. We're pulling the whole rotten tree up by the roots." And she did. Meanwhile, Karen's grip on Redstone Hills began to unravel like cheap ribbon in a thunderstorm. Pamela Griggs, the board member who had first approached us, flipped completely. She handed over emails, meeting minutes, even recordings. One grainy file had Karen saying outright, "The sheriff might own the land on paper, but if we control access, we control the narrative." The audio was damning. So was the line item showing HOA dues used to pay for community beautification, which turned out to mean bribes to that junior zoning clerk who had since resigned and was now cooperating. Local media had a field day. Karen went from iron-fisted ruler to front-page clown. Every move she made was dissected, mocked, and memed. The phrase "Fencegate" became a running joke on the Redstone Hills Facebook group, but it wasn't funny to her anymore. I heard she'd fired her first lawyer after a public screaming match in the courthouse lobby. The second one didn't last a week. By the time she showed up at the preliminary hearing, she looked like a ghost wrapped in pearls. Thin, twitchy, all the fake confidence stripped away. The judge wasn't amused. He denied her motion to dismiss, allowed Abigail's countersuit to proceed in parallel with the criminal case, and issued a protective injunction reaffirming my right to keep the property sealed and to press additional charges if further interference occurred. Meanwhile, the HOA board began to fracture. 3 members resigned within a span of 48 hours. One issued a public statement saying, "I deeply regret allowing Mrs. Summers to operate without oversight." Another one sued her personally for defamation after she tried to blame him for the forged maps. Redstone Hills was eating itself alive, and through it all, I kept showing up. At court, at the ranch, at planning meetings, in uniform and out of it, calm, present. A wall she couldn't scale with lawyers, tantrums, or bulldozers. One night, Marlene brought over a bottle of scotch, and we sat on the porch in silence, looking out over the hills. "I used to think she'd get away with it," she said quietly. "They always do, don't they?" I watched a hawk glide low over the pasture before answering. Not this time. The courtroom was full, not packed like a murder trial, but there were enough eyes on this that you could feel the heat in the air. Members of Redstone Hills sat in the pews behind Karen, whispering in stiff blouses and sunglasses indoors. On my side, a few ranchers, my deputies, Marlene, and even old Judge Parker showed up just to see how this circus ends. Karen walked in last, like she still thought it was her show. Pearls, crisp navy suit, white gloves. Seriously, gloves like she was meeting the queen, but the mask was slipping. She looked drawn, defensive, brittle. She flinched when someone coughed behind her. Abigail opened the case with surgical precision. She began with land titles, walked the court through the chain of ownership going back to 1911. She had color scans, notarized duplicates, original copies. Then she rolled out the zoning maps, county certified, dated, logged, and compared them to the alternate version submitted by the HOA's surveyor. When the judge asked for clarification, she brought out the bombshell: forensic analysis from a state-certified cartographic expert confirming that the HOA's map had been digitally manipulated, with metadata showing edits just weeks before. Submission. Karen's attorney tried to object. The judge waved him down. Then came the videos. From my security cameras, Ricky and the contractor at the gate with bolt cutters. Karen's text messages authorizing the removal. The emails she sent the board calling me the cowboy who needs to be reined in. And then, finally, Pamela. She took the stand and, with trembling hands, described board meetings where Karen dismissed dissenters, threatened to fine members into silence, and outright instructed them to pressure the sheriff out. Karen was pale as wax. Her lawyer tried to recover, spinning the whole thing as miscommunication, overzealous HOA enforcement, and, my favorite, a regrettable misunderstanding between parties of differing cultural perspectives. The judge, bless him, actually laughed. After 4 hours of testimony, the room was dead quiet. When the judge gave his ruling, he didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. He declared that the road through my property never existed legally, that the HOA had no authority over any part of my land, that the acts of sabotage and harassment were criminal in nature, and that Karen's manipulation of documents and attempted misuse of law enforcement constituted an abuse of position. He referred the criminal charges to a higher court for sentencing and ordered immediate financial restitution to me for all damages, including the reconstruction of the fence, legal fees, and loss of livestock due to disturbances. But the kicker? He demanded a full audit of Redstone Hills HOA, citing serious concerns about the integrity of its leadership and accounting practices. The courtroom buzzed like a hornet nest. Karen didn't even look back as she left, just walked stiffly out the side door, trailed by a legal assistant with armfuls of binders like they were dragging the weight of her fall behind her. Abigail and I exchanged a glance. She didn't smile, too professional, but I saw it in her eyes. She knew we'd just cut the head off the snake. I shook hands with Judge Parker on the courthouse steps. He leaned in and said, "Damn fine job, Sheriff. You did it clean and loud." I tipped my hat, because it wasn't just a win. It was a reckoning. 2 months later, the grass grew tall again where that makeshift road used to be. I let it. The land has a way of healing if you give it room. The new fencing was stronger, taller, bolted into the rock like it had always been there. The gates opened only by remote, and the signs weren't subtle. Sheriff's land, trespass, arrest, no exceptions. People got the message. Karen Summers didn't go to jail that day in court, but she didn't walk free for long. After the audit came back, it turned out she'd siphoned off over $70,000 in HOA funds for consulting and administrative enhancements. They found payments to private surveyors, luxury hotel stays in Dallas, and a recurring charge to a boutique wine service in Napa Valley. Once that hit the county DA's desk, it was over. They charged her with wire fraud, document forgery, and criminal misappropriation. She pleaded out, 3 years in state prison, 5 on probation, full restitution, and a 10-year ban from holding any official position in any housing or civic association. The HOA itself dissolved. Redstone Hills was forced into a full reorganization. The community voted to abolish mandatory dues, reduce the board's powers, and switch to a volunteer-based neighborhood watch. Most of the residents actually thanked me. Some even offered to buy beef from the ranch. I said I'd think about it. Pamela moved out of the subdivision. She sent a letter, handwritten, saying she'd learned her lesson the hard way, and that sometimes it takes offense to show people where the real boundaries lie. Ricky, the contractor who tried to cut my gate, did his community service by volunteering at a veterans horse therapy program I recommended. He never looked me in the eye again, but he did send a check to cover the damage. The junior zoning clerk resigned, flipped fully, and helped get 2 more HOA-linked operatives suspended at the county office. The state came down hard on the corruption ring, quietly but effectively. I heard there might be more charges filed soon. And me? I kept being sheriff. Every morning, I rode the perimeter, the dew still wet on the saddle. The ranch was quiet again. I started rebuilding the east barn with Casey on weekends. Marlene started coming by more often, sometimes just for coffee, sometimes to watch the dogs run the fence line like they were guarding Fort Knox. One Sunday, I saw a moving truck outside Karen's old house. She was getting out, escorted by a deputy. She didn't look around, didn't even glance toward my property. Just climbed in the back seat of a black town car and pulled away. A hollow shell in pearls. I watched the dust trail vanish across the asphalt, then turned back to the porch. Hat down, coffee in hand, I muttered, "Some folks forget that fences don't keep people out. They keep the peace in." And on that morning, peace finally held.